Welcome back to the podcast de Philippe. Today we're taking a deep dive into something that I know a lot of people are thinking about these days, and that's the potential global impact of a Donald Trump presidency.
Uh-huh.
We've got a ton of reports, analyses, even some leaked policy drafts that we're going to be digging into.
Wow.
And honestly, some of this stuff is a little bit scary.
Okay.
We're talking about potential trade wars, massive shakeups to the environment,
Right.
and there's even some chatter about potential for actual conflict, like armed conflict.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to try to break down what all of this means for the world,
Okay.
and more importantly, what it means for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because, on the surface, some of these policies might sound pretty appealing to people.
Right.
Like, especially when it comes to the economy. Tax cuts, deregulation.
Sure.
Who doesn't love the idea of having a little bit more freedom, a little bit more money in their pocket? But when you really start to look closer and think about all the potential knock-on effects, all the unintended consequences, I think that's when things start to get a little bit worrisome.
All right, so let's start with those economic policies, because that's really what got a lot of people's attention.
Right.
Trump's been very, very vocal about his protectionist stance.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to China.
Yeah.
So what's the worst case scenario there?
Well, imagine a world where suddenly, like, everything you buy costs way more. Your electronics, your clothes,
Right.
your groceries.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a real consequence of a trade war. These tariffs that he's proposing could trigger this back and forth retaliation
Right.
between countries where everybody's kind of, upping the tariffs on each other.
Right.
And what's that going to do?
Yeah.
It's going to disrupt global supply chains.
Of course.
It's going to make everything more expensive for everybody. Yeah. And it's not just about prices going up either.
Right.
Businesses are going to suffer. Yeah.
Both here and abroad. And that could lead to job losses.
Yeah.
And that could even lead to a global recession.
So not exactly the economic boom that some people were maybe hoping for.
Yeah.
You mentioned tax cuts earlier.
Yeah.
It seems like those could be a mixed bag as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think while they might provide some short-term benefits,
Okay.
like stimulating spending, stimulating investment, when you look long-term, things are a lot less clear.
Sure.
And, the proposed cuts seem very heavily skewed towards corporations and the wealthy.
Right.
Which could actually end up making income inequality even worse. And then you have to factor in what this could do to the national debt.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that raises some serious questions about whether we'll be able to, actually keep funding all those social programs.
Yeah.
All that infrastructure spending.
Right. All the stuff that we rely on.
Yeah. All that stuff that affects our daily lives.
Yep.
Okay. So we've got this potential for economic turmoil brewing.
Yeah.
And then you look at the global stage.
Right.
This America First rhetoric. His skepticism towards these important alliances like NATO.
Yeah.
A lot of people are worried.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a ton of uncertainty about, how a Trump presidency will actually reshape things on the geopolitical stage.
Right.
But his preference for kind of going it alone and, being willing to criticize some of our allies, it's going to put a strain on those relationships.
Yeah.
And it could create this void that countries like Russia or China could take advantage of.
You could step right in.
Exactly. And then you have to think about, the potential for miscalculation.
Right.
If we don't have those alliances, those safety nets, even a small disagreement could escalate really quickly.
Yeah.
And that really increases the risk of some kind of conflict.
All right. So speaking of conflict, I think this is the big question that's on everyone's mind. Could this actually lead to a war?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody knows for sure.
Yeah.
But what we can do is look at the potential trouble spots.
Okay.
The places where tensions are already really high.
All right. So let's do it. What are the trouble spots?
Well, the South China Sea is one that's, pretty obvious.
Okay.
China has been really assertive there lately, building these artificial islands.
Right.
Claiming all this territory that's disputed.
Yeah.
And if the U.S. takes a more aggressive stance under Trump, that could easily spark a conflict.
Right.
And, given how much China's military has grown, this is not a conflict that would just stay in that region.
Right. This would have global consequences.
Exactly.
What about Europe?
Okay.
I mean, his criticism of NATO,
yeah,
a lot of people over there are very concerned.
Well, yeah, NATO has been, the foundation of European security for decades. And any sign that it's weakening It's just going to embolden Russia, especially in places like the Baltic states,
Right.
which have a lot of people who speak Russian.
Uh-huh.
We could see something like what happened in Crimea happen again,
Oh.
or even worse, a full-blown conflict that draws in all the other NATO members.
Right.
And that would be a major war in Europe.
So those are two very specific and very scary potential scenarios.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have to think about the Middle East,
Right.
which it feels like it's always on the verge of some kind of explosion.
Yeah, it's a powder keg for sure.
Yeah. So Trump has been pretty tough on Iran,
Uh-huh.
but he's also really close with Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And that's a pretty volatile combination.
Yeah. I mean, one wrong step, one miscalculation,
Yeah.
and the whole region could go up in flames.
Right.
And that would have consequences for everyone, not just the Middle East.
So we've got this potential for economic turmoil.
Yeah.
All these strained alliances
Right.
and all these geopolitical tinderboxes just waiting for a spark.
Right.
This is a pretty bleak picture.
It definitely is cause for concern, yeah.
Yeah.
But, we have to remember that the future isn't written yet.
Huh.
How all the world's leaders choose to respond to these challenges.
Yeah.
How they engage with each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to determine what happens.
So what can we as individuals do
Mm.
in the face of all of this?
Yeah, it's easy to feel powerless, right?
Sure, when you're talking about these huge global forces.
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is education.
Okay.
The more you understand about all these complex issues,
Uh-huh.
the better equipped you'll be to engage in, actually productive dialogue
Yeah.
and to hold your leaders accountable. And
Yeah.
remember, you do have a voice.
I'm guessing you're going to say vote.
Exactly. Your vote is your power.
Yeah.
Use it wisely.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the big picture stuff,
Right.
but I want to bring it down to a personal level now.
Okay.
What does all this mean for you, the listener?
Right. Right.
How could all of this affect your everyday life?
Yeah. It's easy to get lost in, the abstract.
Uh-huh.
But this stuff has real-world consequences for all of us.
So give me some concrete examples.
Okay, well, let's start with your wallet.
All right.
If all these protectionist trade policies actually lead to a full-blown trade war,
Uh-huh.
the price of everything could go way up.
Okay.
I'm talking about your clothes, your phone,
Right.
the food that you buy at the grocery store.
Yeah.
I mean, everything could get a lot more expensive.
Yeah. And it's not just about prices going up, is it?
No.
I mean, a global economic downturn that could hit a lot closer to home?
Exactly. Businesses start to struggle.
Ah.
Layoffs become widespread.
Yeah.
You could lose your job, your house,
Yeah.
your livelihood.
Wow.
It could trigger a recession here in the U.S.
Right.
that would have ripple effects that everybody would feel.
Okay, so that's the economic side of things.
Right.
What about the environmental impact?
Okay.
How could that affect somebody's everyday life?
Well, as climate change gets worse and worse, we're going to see more and more of those extreme weather events.
Right.
Think about all the heat waves we've been having,
Yeah.
the droughts, the wildfires. That's just a small taste of what's to come.
And those events have a direct impact on people's lives
Yeah,
and on their property.
for sure.
I mean, we're already seeing it in some parts of the country,
Yeah.
and it's only going to get worse.
It is. And then there are the health impacts.
Okay.
Air pollution is going to get worse. Water resources are going to become more and more scarce.
Yeah.
And it's going to be easier for diseases to spread.
Wow.
And these aren't, abstract threats. This
Yeah.
is stuff that could directly affect your health
Yeah.
and your well-being.
So it's like this domino effect.
Uh-huh.
One policy leads to another.
Right.
And pretty soon it's affecting your daily life in these really tangible ways.
Yeah.
It can feel pretty overwhelming.
It can, but it's important that we don't give in to that feeling of helplessness.
Right.
The future isn't set in stone. We still have choices. We can still take action.
So what can people do? Where do we even begin?
Well, I think the first step is education.
Okay.
The more you understand about all these complex issues, the better prepared you'll be to make good decisions and to demand better from your leaders.
Okay, so how do we do that?
We'll read,
Yeah.
listen to podcasts,
Yeah.
have those tough conversations with people who might disagree with you.
Right.
That's important.
Okay. But it's not just about absorbing information, is it?
No.
It's about critical thinking as well.
Absolutely.
You have to question your assumptions.
Right.
You have to challenge your own biases
Uh-huh.
and then form your own opinion.
Exactly. Don't just take things at face value.
Right.
Dig a little deeper, do your own research, and
Yeah.
talk to people who think differently than you do.
Okay, so once you've done all that, what's next?
Then get involved.
Okay.
Support organizations that are working on these issues.
Uh-huh.
Volunteer your time.
Hmm.
Donate to causes that you care about. Right.
Make your voice heard by contacting your elected officials.
Okay.
Write letters to the editor, participate in peaceful protests,
Okay.
and of course, vote
Right.
in every election.
Yeah.
From local all the way up to national,
Mm-hmm.
your vote is your voice.
It matters.
It really does. And remember, democracy isn't a spectator sport.
Uh-huh.
It requires all of us to get involved.
All right. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
Yeah.
Some pretty daunting challenges,
Mm-hmm.
but also some, I think, empowering opportunities to take action.
Right.
So any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just this, don't give up hope.
Okay.
Yeah, the future is uncertain,
Yeah.
but it's also full of possibilities.
Yeah.
If we work together,
Uh-huh.
if we talk to each other,
Yeah.
if we take action,
Yeah.
we can create a better world for ourselves
Uh-huh.
and for future generations.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for that.
You're welcome.
And thank you for listening to Le Podcast de Philippe.
We hope this deep dive has been insightful and thought-provoking.
If you want to keep exploring these topics,
Mm-hmm.
be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube
Yeah.
for more deep dives into the issues that matter most.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged,
Yes.
and stay hopeful.
You know, one of the things that worries me the most about all this is the ripple effect.
Okay.
I mean, these aren't just isolated things, happening in a vacuum.
right.
They can set off this chain reaction
Uh,
that could impact, pretty much the entire world.
give me an example.
Okay.
Help me visualize this ripple effect.
All right, so let's go back to the South China Sea.
Okay.
Imagine you've got a U.S. Navy ship and a Chinese warship,
Mm-hmm.
and they have this tense standoff. Maybe they even bump into each other if
Okay.
things escalate.
Yeah.
You've got these two superpowers, a lot of pride, a lot of firepower.
Right.
Suddenly, it's not just a regional dispute anymore. It's a global conflict.
And I imagine it wouldn't just be about military action. I mean, there would be huge economic fallout as well.
Oh, absolutely. The economic consequences would be devastating.
Yeah.
I mean, China's a huge trading partner for so many countries.
right.
Any kind of conflict would disrupt those supply chains.
Uh-huh.
You'd have shortages, prices would go through the roof,
Yeah.
and you'd have economic instability everywhere.
Wow.
We're talking about a global recession,
Mhm.
maybe even a depression,
Yeah.
and everyone would feel it from Wall Street, all the way down to Main Street.
It's scary to think about how interconnected we all are.
It is.
Even if we don't always realize it,
Right.
it's like you pull on one thread
Yeah,
and the whole tapestry starts to unravel.
it's a great way to put it.
And it's not just the economics either.
Well,
I mean, what about the humanitarian impact?
right.
What happens if a conflict breaks out in a place that's really densely populated?
Yeah. We've seen it before, haven't we?
Yeah.
Those refugee crises? All those people desperately looking for safety, for security. Yeah, we could see millions of people displaced, fleeing violence, persecution.
Right.
It would put a massive strain on neighboring countries,
Yeah.
on aid organizations,
Yeah.
on the entire global community.
And we've seen how these kinds of crises can fuel, xenophobia,
Yeah.
political instability,
Yeah.
even more conflict.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is. So
Yeah.
is there anything we can do to break this cycle? I mean, to reduce these risks?
Well, I think we need to strengthen those international institutions.
Okay.
The ones that are supposed to promote cooperation and dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
We have to give organizations like the United Nations more power to, mediate disputes,
Okay.
enforce international law,
Uh-huh.
create a space for peaceful resolution.
That makes sense. What about individual countries,
Okay.
especially the United States?
Well, the U.S. has always played a really important role
Yeah.
in shaping the global order.
Mm.
But if it steps back, if it abandons its commitments to diplomacy,
Right.
to working with other countries,
Yeah.
it creates this vacuum,
Right.
and someone else is going to fill it.
And it might not be someone we like.
Exactly.
So it sounds like we need strong international institutions
Yeah.
and responsible leadership
Yes.
from powerful countries.
It's a two-pronged approach.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential for conflict
Right.
and all the ripple effects that could have.
Uh-huh.
But there's another huge issue that we can't ignore,
And that is,
the environment.
okay.
I mean, the environment is connected to all of this.
Yeah.
And it's often the first thing to suffer
Uh-huh.
when countries are focused on, short-term economic gain or political power.
Right.
We're already seeing the effects of climate change.
Yeah. The extreme weather,
Uh-huh.
the rising sea levels,
Yeah,
the species going extinct.
exactly. And it's only going to get worse
Right.
if we don't do something.
But that requires global cooperation, doesn't it?
And with all the political division,
Yeah.
all the nationalism we're seeing, it's hard to imagine everyone coming together.
It is a challenge, but there's a growing global movement for climate action.
Okay.
Young people in particular are demanding change, and they're holding their leaders accountable.
So there's some hope there.
Yeah, there's some momentum building.
Okay.
And it's not just activism either.
Okay.
A lot of businesses are starting to realize that sustainability is good for their bottom line. So you're seeing more companies investing in renewable energy, reducing their carbon footprint, embracing, those circular economy principles.
So there are signs of progress.
There are.
But it sounds like we still have a long way to go.
We do, but we have to acknowledge both the challenges and the opportunities. We need to be realistic about the risks. But we also need to stay hopeful.
Right.
We have to believe that we can work together to create a better future.
Well, that's a good segue to our next topic.
Okay.
I want to talk about what all this means for you, the listener.
Right.
And what you can do to navigate, this uncertain world.
So we've been talking about these big global issues.
Right. Trade wars, political instability.
Climate change.
Yeah. But it's important to, bring it down to a personal level.
Right.
How could these things actually affect, someone listening to this right now?
Yeah.
In their everyday life?
It's easy to get lost in the, the big picture.
Yeah.
But this stuff has real-world consequences for all of us.
So give me some concrete examples.
Okay, well, think about your wallet.
Okay.
If these protectionist trade policies that Trump keeps talking about actually lead to a trade war, the price of everyday things could go way up.
Yeah. Like what kind of things?
Your phone, your clothes, food at the grocery store.
Right.
I mean, just about everything could get a lot more expensive.
And it's not just prices going up either, right?
Right.
A global economic downturn, that could affect people's jobs.
Oh, absolutely. If businesses start to struggle, if they have to start laying people off.
Yeah.
You could lose your job. You could lose your house.
Yeah.
Your livelihood.
Wow.
It could trigger a recession here in the U.S., which would then have ripple effects that everyone would feel.
Okay, so that's the economic side of things.
Right.
What about the environmental impact?
Yeah.
How could that play out in someone's day-to-day life?
Well, as climate change continues to get worse, we're going to see a lot more of these extreme weather events.
Right.
Heat waves, droughts, wildfires, things like that.
And those things have a direct impact on people's lives, on their property.
Yeah. I mean, we're already seeing it in some parts of the country.
And it's only going to get worse.
It is. And then you have to factor in the health impacts.
Yeah.
Air pollution is going to get worse. Water is going to become more and more scarce. And diseases are going to spread more easily.
It's scary to think about.
It is.
So it's like this domino effect,
Right. One policy change leads to another, and pretty soon it's affecting your daily life.
Yeah.
In all these really tangible ways.
It can feel pretty overwhelming.
It can, but it's important not to just give up.
Right.
To just throw your hands up and say, there's nothing I can do.
We can't give in to that feeling of helplessness.
Okay.
The future isn't set in stone. We still have choices.
Yeah.
We can still take action.
So what can people do? Where do we even start?
Well, I think the first step is always education.
Okay.
The more you understand about these really complex issues, the better prepared you'll be to make good decisions.
Okay.
And to demand better from your leaders.
How do we do that?
Read, listen to podcasts, have those tough conversations with people who might not agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah. All of that is important.
But it's not just about absorbing information, is it?
No.
You have to be able to think critically as well.
Absolutely. You have to question your assumptions.
Yeah.
Challenge your own biases.
And really, figure out what you believe and why.
Right. Don't just take things at face value.
Exactly. Dig a little deeper. Do your own research.
Yeah.
Talk to people who have different perspectives than you do.
Okay. So once you've done all that, then what?
Then get involved.
Okay.
Support organizations that are working on these issues. Volunteer your time. Donate to causes that you believe in.
Right.
Make your voice heard.
Okay. How do we do that?
Contact your elected officials. Write letters to the editor. Participate in peaceful protests.
Okay.
And of course, vote.
Yes. In every election.
Every single one.
Yeah.
From local all the way up to national. Your vote is your voice. Don't forget that.
It matters.
It really does. And remember, democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires all of us to participate.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
We have.
Some pretty daunting challenges,
Huh.
but also some, I think, really empowering opportunities to take action.
Right, we can make a difference.
So any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Just this, don't give up hope.
Okay.
The future is uncertain, but it's also full of possibilities.
Yeah.
If we worked together, if we have those tough conversations,
Mhm.
if we take action,
Yeah.
we can create a better world.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that.
You're welcome.
And thank you for listening to Le Podcast de Philippe.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
We hope you found this deep dive insightful and thought-provoking.
And if you want to keep exploring these topics, be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube.
Yes, we've got a lot more deep dives coming your way.
Exactly.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged.
And stay hopeful.
We'll see you soon.